In the depths of space, where alien empires clash and entire species hang in the balance, legends are born not from grand proclamations but from quiet moments when the universe holds its breath. Sometimes the most dangerous warriors are those who have learned to hide their scars, and sometimes the greatest secrets are carried by those who appear most ordinary. What happens when a species thought extinct walks among the living? What happens when the galaxy's most feared combat doctrine is wielded by hands that have learned to be gentle? And what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, even among the stars? This is the story of a human who tried to disappear, serving alongside aliens who never knew they were standing next to their own salvation. This is the story of how legends return, not with thunder, but with the quiet click of weapons being readied by someone who has never forgotten how to fight, even when they've tried their hardest to forget who they used to be. The galaxy is about to remember why humanity was once whispered about in the dark corners of space stations, and why some ghosts are better left undisturbed. Marcus Chen kept his head down as he walked through the corridors of Outpost Kepler 7, his standard-issue boots making soft sounds against the metal flooring. 3 months into his assignment, and he still felt like an outsider among the diverse crew of the Galactic Defense Coalition. The outpost housed representatives from 12 different species, all working together to monitor the volatile border region between Coalition space and the territory controlled by the hegemony of Scar. The human contingent at Kepler 7 was small, just 15 soldiers out of a crew of 200. Most of them were recent graduates from the Coalition Military Academy. Eager young faces who spoke in excited whispers about the possibility of seeing real combat. Marcus found their enthusiasm both touching and naive. At 34, he was older than most of them by a decade, and the age difference showed in more than just the lines around his eyes. "Hey, Chen," called out Private Torres as Marcus passed the mess hall. "You coming to the sim training this afternoon? Lieutenant Voss is running combat scenarios." Marcus paused, turning to face the younger man. Torres was built like a linebacker, all broad shoulders and enthusiasm, the kind of soldier who volunteered for everything and somehow made friends with every species on the base. "I'll pass," Marcus said quietly. "Got some maintenance work to catch up on." Torres's face fell slightly. "Come on, man. You've been here 3 months and we've barely seen you outside of duty shifts. The others are starting to think you don't like us." "It's not personal," Marcus replied, adjusting the strap of his equipment bag. "Just prefer to keep to myself." "Look, I get it if you're nervous," Torres said, lowering his voice. "I know you didn't go through the academy like the rest of us. Whatever civilian job you had before, this military stuff can seem intense at first, but that's exactly why you should join us for training. We can help you get up to speed." Marcus felt something twist in his chest at Torres's well-meaning words. If only the kid knew. "Thanks for the offer," he said. "Maybe next time." He walked away before Torres could respond, leaving the young soldier looking confused and slightly hurt. Marcus hated doing it, but it was easier this way. Easier than trying to explain why watching them stumble through basic combat drills made his hands shake with the urge to correct every mistake they made. The maintenance bay was mercifully empty when Marcus arrived. He'd volunteered for the graveyard shift specifically to avoid the crowds, and the skeleton crew meant he could work in peace. His official job was systems maintenance, keeping the outpost's defensive arrays and communication equipment running smoothly. It was honest work, and it let him blend into the background exactly the way he wanted. Marcus pulled up the diagnostic panel for the primary sensor array and began running through the standard checks. The work was routine, almost meditative. Numbers scrolled across his screen, indicating normal function across all systems. Everything was green. Everything was stable, just the way he liked it. "Excuse me, Technician Chen?" Marcus looked up to see Commander Zalakith approaching. The Ashaki officer was tall even by her species standards, with the characteristic blue-scaled skin and forearms that marked her as coming from a high-gravity world. Her compound eyes could focus independently, which always made conversations with her feel slightly disorienting. "Commander," Marcus said, standing at attention, "what can I do for you?" "I wanted to personally thank you for your work on the communication array last week," she said, her voice carrying the slight whistle that came from Ashaki vocal cords. The efficiency improvements you implemented have increased our monitoring range by 12%. Just doing my job, ma'am. Zalaketh studied him with those unsettling eyes. Your personnel file indicates you have no formal technical training, yet your work consistently exceeds that of soldiers with advanced certifications. Where did you learn such skills? Marcus kept his expression neutral. I've always been good with machines. Indeed. The commander continued to watch him for a long moment. I also understand you've declined all invitations to participate in combat training exercises. Yes, ma'am. I feel my time is better spent maintaining the systems that keep us all alive. A commendable attitude, Zalakith said. However, all personnel at this outpost are expected to maintain basic combat readiness. I'm afraid I must insist that you attend tomorrow's training session. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Commander, with respect, my role here is purely technical. I'm not expected to. The hegemony has been increasing patrols along our border, Zalaketh interrupted. Intelligence suggests they may be planning something significant. In the event of an attack, every person on this station may be called upon to defend it. I need to know that you can handle yourself in combat. I understand, ma'am, Marcus said, knowing there was no point in arguing further. Excellent. Report to Training Bay 3 at 0800 hours. Zalaketh turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Chen, bring your sidearm. Tomorrow's exercise will be using live weapons. After the commander left, Marcus stood alone in the maintenance bay staring at the diagnostic readouts without really seeing them. His hands were trembling slightly, and he clenched them into fists to make it stop. 3 months of careful invisibility, and now he was going to be forced into the one situation he'd been desperately trying to avoid. He thought about the young soldiers he'd watched training, their eager faces and clumsy movements. They had no idea what real combat looked like, no understanding of what it meant to kill or be killed. They treated warfare like a game, a chance to prove themselves and win glory. Marcus knew better. He'd seen what war really looked like, had lived through things that would give these kids nightmares for the rest of their lives. And tomorrow, he was going to have to pretend to be one of them, just another maintenance tech learning to soldier. The worst part was that he knew he couldn't hold back completely without raising suspicions, but how much could he show without revealing who he really was? How could he demonstrate basic competence without accidentally displaying skills that would make people ask uncomfortable questions? Marcus finished his shift and made his way back to his quarters, a small room in the enlisted section that he decorated with exactly nothing. No personal photos, no mementos, nothing that might prompt questions about his past. The walls were regulation gray, and the single small window looked out onto the asteroid field that surrounded the outpost. He sat on the edge of his narrow bunk and pulled out his personal tablet, scrolling through news feeds from across the galaxy. Most of it was the usual political posturing and trade disputes, but one headline made him pause. Hegemony announces discovery of pre-war human military installation. Marcus opened the article, his heart rate climbing as he read. The Hegemony had found one of the old research facilities, abandoned since the end of the Human Hegemony War 15 years ago. The article speculated about what technologies might be recovered, what secrets the ruins might hold. What it didn't mention was that most of those facilities had been booby-trapped before abandonment, rigged with systems designed to deny useful technology to enemy forces. Marcus knew this because he'd helped design some of those denial protocols himself, back when he'd been someone else entirely. The war had ended with humanity's near extinction as a military force, their homeworlds devastated and their fleets scattered. Most people assumed that human military doctrine had died with the old government. They were wrong, but Marcus had no intention of correcting that assumption. He'd worked too hard to build this quiet life to throw it away now. He closed the tablet and lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would go to the training exercise and do his best to look like an incompetent maintenance tech playing soldier. He would miss shots that should have been easy, make tactical errors that would make the instructors shake their heads in disappointment. He would be forgettable, unremarkable, exactly the kind of person who faded into the background. The problem was that Marcus wasn't sure he remembered how to be incompetent anymore. 15 years of hiding hadn't erased 30 years of training, and muscle memory had a way of asserting itself at the worst possible moments. He would have to be very, very careful. Outside his window, the asteroid field drifted in its eternal dance, chunks of rock and metal tumbling through the void under the light of distant stars. Somewhere out there, the hegemony was preparing for something. Marcus could feel it in his bones. The same instinct that had kept him alive through a dozen campaigns and 100 battles. War was coming to the Outer Rim, and when it arrived, Marcus would have to choose between maintaining his carefully constructed anonymity and protecting the people who had become his unlikely comrades. He'd hoped to never face that choice, but hope was a luxury that soldiers rarely got to keep. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would change everything one way or another. In the darkness of his quarters, surrounded by the quiet hum of the station's life support systems, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past was finally catching up with him. The last thing he saw before drifting off was the distant glow of a hegemony patrol ship, just a speck of light against the stars, but growing larger with each passing hour. Training Bay 3 was buzzing with activity when Marcus arrived at precisely 08:000 hours. 24 coalition soldiers from various species were checking their equipment and chatting nervously among themselves. The bay had been configured as an urban combat environment, with modular walls creating a maze of corridors and rooms that simulated a city under siege. Marcus recognized most of the human contingent, along with several Ashaki soldiers, a handful of the insectoid Kithara, and 2 massive Gorvani whose thick armored hides made them natural shock troops. At the center of the group stood Lieutenant Voss, a career officer whose crisp uniform and confident demeanor marked him as academy-trained through and through. "Listen up, people!" Voss called out, his voice carrying easily across the bay. "Today's exercise is urban warfare, close-quarters combat. You'll be divided into 2 teams, attackers and defenders. The scenario is simple. Defenders hold a fortified position. Attackers have to take it. Live ammunition, but non-lethal rounds only. Your suits will register hits and determine casualties." Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Standard-issue coalition rifle, sidearm, tactical vest, and helmet with heads-up display. All familiar, though he made sure to handle everything with the slight awkwardness of someone still learning. Around him, the other soldiers were doing the same, though their nervousness was genuine. "Chen!" Voss pointed at Marcus. "You're with the attacking force. Torres, you'll be team leader for the attackers." Marcus nodded and moved to join the attacking team, noting the mixture of relief and apprehension on Torres's face. The young soldier clearly wanted to do well in front of the lieutenant, but he also looked overwhelmed by the responsibility. "All right, people," Torres said as the attacking team huddled together. "Standard urban assault doctrine. We breach the main entrance, establish fire teams, and advance by bounds. Kithara soldiers take point with their enhanced senses. Gorvani provide heavy support. Everyone else follows standard suppression patterns." Marcus listened to the briefing with half his attention, the other half automatically cataloging the tactical situation. The defenders had chosen their positions well, with overlapping fields of fire and good defensive cover. But they'd also made several critical errors that a competent assault team could exploit. The main entrance was an obvious choke point, but there were maintenance shafts that could provide alternate routes into the defended area. The defenders had positioned their heavy weapons to cover the main approaches, but they'd left their flanks vulnerable to a coordinated assault. Most importantly, they were thinking like academy students running a classroom exercise, not like soldiers fighting for their lives. "Questions?" Torres asked. Marcus raised his hand. "What's our timeline for the assault?" "Good question," Torres said, looking pleased. "Lieutenant Voss said we have 30 minutes to take the objective or the exercise ends with a defender victory. 30 minutes. Marcus had taken objectives twice this size in half that time, but that had been with professional soldiers who knew their business. These kids were brave and enthusiastic, but they moved like they were afraid of breaking something. "Movement in 5 minutes," Torres announced. "Check your gear and get ready." The attacking force moved into position at the entrance to the urban environment. Through his helmet's display, Marcus could see the basic layout of the area they were about to assault. It was a good simulation, realistic enough to provide genuine training value. "Go, go, go!" Torres shouted, and the assault began. What followed was exactly what Marcus had expected, a textbook example of how not to conduct urban warfare. The Cathara scouts moved too slowly, more concerned with their own safety than with gathering intelligence. The Gorvani heavy weapons team positioned themselves where they had impressive fields of fire but no tactical flexibility. The human soldiers bunched up in the corridors, creating perfect targets for any defender with decent training. Marcus found himself in the middle of the assault force trying to look like he belonged while watching his teammates make mistake after mistake. A Cathara soldier ahead of him suddenly froze, mandibles clicking in alarm. "Contact front!" the insectoid warrior hissed. "3 defenders! Elevated position!" The response was immediate but uncoordinated. Half the assault team took cover behind whatever protection they could find, while the other half kept moving, not realizing their teammates had stopped. The result was a confused mass of soldiers with no clear line of command and no coordinated response to the threat. Marcus watched a young human private named Jackson expose himself to enemy fire while trying to get a better shooting position. The kid was about to walk directly into a crossfire that would have cut him down in real combat. Without thinking, Marcus moved. He crossed the corridor in 3 quick strides, grabbed Jackson by the shoulder, and pulled him back into cover just as simulated enemy fire lit up the space where he'd been standing. The movement was smooth, efficient, and completely automatic. "Thanks," Jackson gasped, his face pale beneath his helmet. "I didn't see—" "Stay low," Marcus said quietly. "Watch your corners." The firefight continued around them, but Marcus forced himself to stay in character. He fired his rifle at obvious targets, missing more often than he hit, and kept his movements deliberately awkward. But he couldn't completely suppress his tactical awareness, and he found himself noting details that the others missed. The defenders were using predictable firing patterns, exposing themselves at regular intervals. Their communication was good but not encrypted, which meant anyone with basic signal intelligence training could monitor their tactical frequencies. Most importantly, they were fighting like they expected to win, which meant they weren't prepared for a determined enemy willing to take casualties. "We're getting bogged down," Torres said over the comm, frustration clear in his voice. "Any ideas?" Marcus looked at his chronometer. 20 minutes remaining, and they'd barely made it past the first defensive line. At this rate, the exercise would end with the defenders holding their position and the assault force learning a painful lesson about urban warfare. He thought about speaking up, about sharing some of the tactical insights that were second nature to him. But doing so would raise questions about where a maintenance technician had learned advanced military doctrine. Better to stay quiet and let the exercise run its course. But then he saw Private Martinez move into an exposed position, trying to get a flanking shot on a defended doorway. The kid was brave but inexperienced, and he was about to walk into an ambush that even Marcus could see coming. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He keyed his comb to a private channel. "Martinez, stop. 3 meters to your left, covered position. Defender waiting for you to move past." "How do you—" Martinez began, then stopped as he spotted the defender exactly where Marcus had indicated. "Holy shit, you're right. Take him from here," Marcus said. "You've got the angle." Martinez fired twice, and his target's suit registered the hits. The defender slumped against the wall, officially out of action. "Nice shot," Marcus said, but he was already regretting the intervention. He'd revealed tactical awareness that didn't match his supposed background, and in a group this small, people would remember. The assault continued, and despite his efforts to remain unremarkable, Marcus found himself making small contributions that helped the team advance. A word of warning here, a tactical suggestion there, always delivered quietly and always framed as lucky guesses or obvious observations. With 10 minutes remaining, the assault force had fought their way to the final defensive position. The defenders had done well, using their advantages effectively and making the attackers pay for every meter of ground. But they were also getting tired, and their coordination was starting to break down. "Final push," Torres announced. "We hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. Cathara team takes the left approach, Gorvani team goes right, humans take the center." It was a reasonable plan, but Marcus could see the flaw immediately. The defenders had positioned themselves to funnel attacking forces into kill zones, and a straightforward three-pronged assault would walk directly into their strength. What they needed was a distraction, something to draw the defenders out of their prepared positions. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He'd already said too much, revealed too much. Better to let the assault fail than to compromise his carefully maintained cover. But as he watched his teammates prepare for what would essentially be a suicide charge, something inside him rebelled. These were good people, brave soldiers who deserved better than to be cut down by their own inexperience. They trusted him, had accepted him as one of their own despite his reluctance to fully join their group. "Torres," he said quietly, "what if we create a diversion?" "What kind of diversion?" Marcus pointed to a maintenance shaft that connected to the defender's position. Someone could get in through there, set off some noise and movement to draw their attention. While they're focused on the distraction, the main assault hits them from the planned directions. Torres's eyes lit up. That could work. Volunteers for the diversion? Several hands went up, but Marcus shook his head. "Should be someone expendable," he said. "In case it goes wrong, I'll do it," he added before anyone else could volunteer. The maintenance shaft was cramped and poorly lit, exactly the kind of environment that Marcus had learned to navigate during his years of real combat. He moved through it with practiced silence, his body automatically adjusting to the confined space. The shaft opened into the rear of the defender's position, giving him a perfect view of their setup. They'd arranged themselves well, with good cover and overlapping fields of fire. But they were all focused outward, watching for the expected assault. Marcus checked his chronometer. 3 minutes remaining. It was now or never. He activated his comm and keyed it to the general frequency. Diversion starting in 30 seconds. When you hear the noise, hit them hard and fast. Marcus pulled 2 flashbang grenades from his belt, armed them, and threw them into the defender's position. The explosions were blinding and deafening, causing exactly the kind of confusion he'd hoped for. "Go, go, go!" he heard Torres shout over the comm. The assault force hit the defenders from 3 directions simultaneously, and this time their timing was perfect. Caught off guard by the diversion and temporarily blinded by the flashbangs, the defenders couldn't mount an effective response. Within 2 minutes, the objective was secured, and the exercise was over. "Excellent work, everyone," Lieutenant Voss announced as the bay's lights came up. "Attackers win with 30 seconds to spare." That diversion tactic was particularly well executed. The assault team gathered around Marcus, slapping his shoulders and offering congratulations. Torres was grinning from ear to ear, clearly pleased with his team's success. "Where did you learn to move like that?" asked Martinez. "You were like a ghost in that maintenance shaft." Marcus shrugged. "Just common sense. Stay quiet, move carefully." But he could see the questions in their eyes, the growing awareness that there was more to their quiet maintenance tech than met the eye. He'd managed to help them win the exercise, but in doing so, he'd revealed capabilities that didn't match his supposed background. Lieutenant Voss approached the group, his expression thoughtful. "Technician Chen, a word?" Marcus followed the lieutenant to a quiet corner of the bay, his stomach sinking as he prepared for questions he couldn't answer. "That was impressive work," Voss said. "Quick thinking, good tactical awareness. Have you considered applying for combat certification?" "No, sir," Marcus replied. "I prefer my current duties. I see." Voss studied him for a long moment. "Your personnel file is quite sparse, you know. No military background, no formal training records, just a note that you were recruited for technical expertise." "That's correct, sir. And yet today you demonstrated tactical skills that rival those of academy graduates." Voss paused. "Where exactly did you serve before joining the coalition, Technician Chen?" Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the careful balance he'd maintained for 3 months beginning to crumble. Around them, the other soldiers were cleaning their equipment and discussing the exercise, but he felt isolated from their easy camaraderie. "I worked civilian jobs," he said finally. "Nothing military." "I see." Lieutenant Voss didn't look convinced, but he didn't push further. Well, regardless of your background, today's performance was exemplary. I'll be noting it in my report. As the lieutenant walked away, Marcus knew that his quiet life at Outpost Kepler 7 was beginning to unravel. He'd managed to help his teammates without completely exposing himself, but the questions were starting. And questions led to investigations which led to discoveries that could destroy everything he'd worked to build. The other soldiers were still celebrating their victory, but Marcus felt only a growing sense of dread. His past was catching up with him, one tactical decision at a time. The alarm klaxons began wailing at 0347 hours, jerking Marcus from an uneasy sleep. Red emergency lighting bathed the corridors as he pulled on his uniform and grabbed his equipment, muscle memory taking over as his mind struggled to catch up. Around him, other soldiers were doing the same, their faces tight with the kind of fear that came from knowing this wasn't a drill. All hands to battle stations. Commander Zalakith's voice crackled over the station's comm system. This is not an exercise. Hegemony forces have been detected approaching our position. All personnel report to designated stations immediately. Marcus joined the stream of soldiers moving through the corridors, noting the controlled panic in their movements. Most of these people had trained for this moment but never experienced it, and the difference between simulation and reality was already showing. The human soldiers looked particularly shaken, their faces pale under the emergency lighting. He made his way to his assigned station in the main communication array, where his job was to maintain the systems that would coordinate the station's defense. But as he passed through the command center, he couldn't help but notice the tactical display showing the approaching hegemony force. 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and a swarm of smaller attack craft. It was a significant force, far more than needed to take a single outpost. The hegemony was making a statement, demonstrating their power and resolve to anyone watching. "Chen!" Commander Zalakith called out as she spotted him. "How quickly can you boost our communication range? We need to get a message to Coalition Command." Marcus moved to his station and began working, his fingers dancing across the control panels with practiced efficiency. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, already beginning the power rerouting procedures that would extend their transmission range. "We don't have 5 minutes," Zalakith replied, her forearms working simultaneously at her own station. "Long-range sensors show they'll be in weapons range within 10 minutes. Marcus paused, considering. He could boost the communication array much faster, but doing so would require techniques that weren't in any standard manual. Techniques he'd learned during his years as a communications specialist in the Human Defense Corps, back when that organization had still existed. "I can do it in 2 minutes," he said quietly. Zalakith's compound eyes focused on him with sudden intensity. "Do it." Marcus's hands moved with sure precision, bypassing safety protocols and jury-rigging power connections that would have horrified a safety inspector. The communication array's output jumped by 300%, enough to punch a signal through to Coalition Command despite the interference from the approaching enemy ships. "Message sent," reported Lieutenant Voss from his station. "But response time will be at least 6 hours. We're on our own until then." The tactical display updated, showing the hegemony force splitting into attack formations. Marcus found himself studying their approach patterns, automatically analyzing their strategy and looking for weaknesses. It was a textbook assault formation designed to overwhelm the station's defenses through coordinated strikes from multiple vectors. "Defense grid is powered and ready," reported Chief Petty Officer Huang. "All weapon systems show green across the board. Shields at maximum," added Ensign Karath, the Kithara's mandibles clicking nervously. "But they won't last long against that kind of firepower." Marcus watched the display, his tactical mind automatically running calculations. The station's defensive systems were adequate for dealing with pirates or small raiding forces, but they weren't designed to handle a full military assault. The hegemony ships would pound them into scrap metal within an hour unless something changed the equation. "First contact in 30 seconds, Voss announced. The station shuddered as the first enemy weapons fire struck the shields. Marcus gripped his console as the lights flickered and alarms began sounding throughout the command center. On the tactical display, he could see the coordinated assault unfolding exactly as he'd predicted. Shields down to 80%, Karath reported. They're concentrating fire on the shield generators. Return fire, Commander Zalaketh ordered. All weapons, engage at will. The station's defensive batteries opened up, sending streams of energy toward the attacking ships. But Marcus could see immediately that their fire was poorly coordinated, each weapon system operating independently instead of working as part of a unified defense network. We need to coordinate our firing patterns, he said without thinking. Target their lead ship with everything we have, overwhelm their shields before moving to the next target. Zalaketh looked at him sharply. You're a communications technician, Chen. Focus on keeping our systems operational. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied, but he continued to watch the tactical display with growing frustration. The station's defenders were fighting bravely but ineffectively, their lack of real combat experience showing in every decision. The hegemony ships pressed their attack, their weapons fire becoming more accurate as they found the range. The station's shields were already down to 60%, and one of the defensive batteries had been knocked offline. Damage to Section 7 came a report from Damage Control. Hull breach sealed, but we've lost primary sensors in that quadrant. Marcus looked at the sensor readings and immediately saw the problem. The hegemony ships were using the dead sensor zone to mask their approach, preparing for a concentrated assault on the station's weakest point. Commander, he said urgently, they're setting up for a flanking attack through our sensor blind spot. If we don't reposition our defenses, I said focus on your own job, technician, Zalaketh snapped. We have qualified tactical officers handling the defense. But Marcus could see that the qualified tactical officers weren't seeing what he was seeing. They were fighting the battle they'd trained for, not the battle that was actually happening. And in another few minutes, that mistake was going to cost everyone on the station their lives. The next wave of enemy fire was even more devastating. 2 more defensive batteries went offline, and the shields dropped to 40%. Worse, the hegemony ships were beginning to launch their attack craft, small but deadly fighters that would be nearly impossible to hit with the station's remaining weapons. Enemy fighters launching, Voss reported, his voice tight with stress. Estimate 40-plus small craft incoming. Marcus watched the tactical display as the fighters spread out in a classic swarm formation designed to overwhelm the station's point defenses. It was a good tactic, one that would have worked against most static defenses. But Marcus had seen this pattern before, had fought against similar swarms during the war. He knew their weakness, knew how to turn their coordination against them. Commander, he said again, his voice steady despite the chaos around them, those fighters are using a networked targeting system. If we can disrupt their communication frequencies, they'll lose coordination and become much easier targets. Zalaketh started to dismiss him again, but another blast rocked the station and she seemed to reconsider. Explain. Their communication frequency will be somewhere in the 2.4 to 2.7 gigahertz range, Marcus said, his hands already moving over his console. If I can identify the exact frequency and generate enough interference, their targeting computers will default to manual operation. Do it, Zalaketh ordered. Marcus began scanning the communication spectrum, looking for the telltale signatures of military communication protocols. It took him less than 30 seconds to identify the frequency the hegemony fighters were using, and another minute to configure the communication array to generate the right kind of interference. Jamming in progress, he reported. Their targeting should be disrupted in 5, 4, 2. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The hegemony fighters suddenly broke their precise formations, individual craft peeling off in different directions as their pilots struggled to maintain coordination without their networked systems. Target the fighters now, Marcus called out. While they're confused? This time, Zalaketh didn't hesitate. All point defenses, engage the fighters. Concentrate fire on the scattered groups. The station's remaining weapons opened up on the disorganized fighters, and the results were devastating. Without their coordination and network targeting, the small craft were easy prey for the point defense systems. Within minutes, half the fighter force had been destroyed or disabled, but the victory was temporary. The hegemony cruisers were pressing their attack, and the station's shields were down to 20%. Worse, Marcus could see on the tactical display that they were preparing for their final assault, concentrating their firepower for a killing blow. "All hands prepare for final defense," Commander Zalaketh announced over the station's comm system. "This is going to be close." Marcus stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. The station was doomed unless something changed the tactical situation dramatically. They needed an advantage, some way to level the playing field against superior numbers and firepower. And suddenly he knew what needed to be done. "Commander," he said quietly, "I need to access the station's main weapons array." "What? Why?" "There's a way to boost our firepower, but I need direct access to the targeting computers and power distribution systems." Zalaketh looked at him for a long moment, her compound eyes taking in his steady demeanor amid the chaos. "Do it," she said finally. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast." Marcus left his communication station and moved to the main weapons console, pushing aside the young officer who had been operating it. His hands moved with practiced precision, calling up targeting solutions and power distribution protocols that hadn't been used since the war. "What are you doing?" Lieutenant Voss asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Overcharging the main batteries," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing across multiple control surfaces simultaneously. "We're going to get one shot at maximum power, probably burn out half our systems in the process." "That's impossible," Voss protested. "The safety protocols are designed to prevent exactly what I'm doing," Marcus finished. "But sometimes you have to break the rules to survive." He bypassed safety system after safety system, rerouting power from life support, artificial gravity, and every non-essential system on the station. The main weapons array began charging to levels far beyond its design specifications, warning lights flashing as the system protested the treatment. "Weapons at 150% of rated capacity," Marcus announced, targeting the lead cruiser's main reactor. "If this works, the explosion should damage or destroy the ships nearest to it." "If it doesn't work," Zalaketh asked, "then we'll find out what the inside of a hegemony prisoner transport looks like." The overcharged weapons fired in a brilliant flash of energy that could be seen across the entire system. The beam struck the lead cruiser's shields, overloading them in seconds, and punched through the hull directly into the ship's main reactor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the cruiser simply disintegrated in a fireball that consumed 2 nearby destroyers and severely damaged a third. The remaining hegemony ships suddenly found themselves facing a very different tactical situation. "Direct hit," shouted Krath, his mandibles clicking excitedly. 3 ships destroyed, 1 heavily damaged." The surviving hegemony ships hesitated, clearly not having expected such devastating defensive fire. In that moment of uncertainty, coalition reinforcements finally arrived, jumping into the system with weapons ready. "This is Admiral Chen aboard the CNV Retribution," came a voice over the communication system. "Kepler 7, report your status." Commander Zalaketh keyed her comm with relief evident in her voice. "Admiral Chen, this is Commander Zalaketh. We've successfully repelled the hegemony assault, but we've taken heavy damage." The battle was effectively over. Faced with coalition reinforcements and the devastating loss of their heavy ships, the remaining hegemony forces retreated to their own territory. The station was safe, though barely. As the all-clear signal sounded, Marcus found himself surrounded by his fellow soldiers, all of them looking at him with expressions of wonder and suspicion. He'd just displayed tactical and technical knowledge that far exceeded anything a maintenance technician should possess. "Chen," Commander Zalaketh approached, her forearms crossed in a gesture that Marcus recognized as deep contemplation. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your background." Marcus nodded slowly, knowing that his carefully maintained anonymity was finally at an end. "Yes, ma'am, I think it is." But before he could say anything else, Lieutenant Voss was studying a readout from the communication system. "Commander," he said slowly, "I think you should see this. The Admiral who just arrived to rescue us. His name is Chen, same as our technician here." Zalaketh's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with sudden intensity. "Is there something you'd like to tell us, Technician Chen?" Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 15 years of carefully maintained secrets finally crashing down around him. "It's a long story, ma'am." "I imagine it is," Zalaketh replied, "and I think it's about time we heard it." The command center had been cleared of all personnel except for Commander Zalaketh, Lieutenant Voss, and Marcus. The tactical displays still showed the aftermath of the battle, with coalition ships securing the area and damage control teams working to repair the station's critical systems. But Marcus's attention was focused on the door, where footsteps could be heard approaching. Admiral Chen entered the command center with the measured pace of someone who had been expecting this moment for a very long time. He was an older man, his hair silver and his face lined with the kind of marks that came from years of difficult decisions. When he saw Marcus, his expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested recognition. "Admiral," Commander Zalaketh said, snapping to attention. "Thank you for the timely rescue." "Commander Zalaketh," the Admiral replied with a slight nod. "I'm glad we arrived when we did. Your defensive efforts were impressive." His gaze shifted to Marcus, particularly the tactical use of overcharged weapons systems. "That's an old trick. Not many people know how to pull it off without destroying their own ship." Marcus stood at attention, knowing that the moment of truth had finally arrived. "Admiral." "At ease, soldier," Admiral Chen said, and something in his tone made it clear that he knew exactly who he was talking to. "It's been a long time, hasn't it, Marcus?" Commander Zalaketh looked between the two humans, her compound eyes focusing independently on each of them. "I take it you two know each other?" "We served together," the Admiral said simply, "during the war. Marcus was one of my tactical officers aboard the CNV Prometheus. Before," he paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Before circumstances forced him to disappear." Lieutenant Voss stepped forward, his expression confused. "Sir, our records show that Technician Chen has no military background. His file indicates he was recruited from civilian industries." "Those records are accurate as far as they go," Admiral Chen replied. "Marcus Chen, the maintenance technician, has no military background." "But that's not who he really is it?" Marcus felt the last of his carefully constructed identity crumbling away. "No, sir. It isn't." "Then who are you?" Zalaketh demanded, her voice sharp with authority and suspicion. Marcus looked at his commanding officer, then at Lieutenant Voss and the other officers who had gathered despite orders to clear the room. These people had trusted him, had fought alongside him, and they deserved the truth. "My real name is Marcus Chen," he said quietly. "But 15 years ago, I held the rank of colonel in the Human Defense Corps. I was the commanding officer of the 3rd Special Operations Battalion, also known as the Ghost Brigade." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the background hum of the station's system seemed to fade as the implications of his words sank in. Lieutenant Voss was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Ghost Brigade, they were legends. We studied their tactics at the academy. They were supposed to have died with Earth." "Most of them did," Marcus replied. "Along with our homeworld and everything else we were fighting to protect." Admiral Chen moved to the tactical display, his fingers tracing the patterns of the battle they'd just fought. "What happened here today, the way you coordinated the defense, disrupted their communications, used the overcharged weapons, those were Ghost Brigade tactics, weren't they?" Marcus nodded. "Modified for defensive operations, but yes. The communication jamming was based on protocols we developed for disrupting hegemony fleet coordination. The weapons overcharge was something we used when we needed to punch above our weight class." "But how?" Commander Zalaketh asked. "The Ghost Brigade was destroyed 15 years ago. Every record we have indicates that no members survived the fall of Earth." "The records are wrong," Marcus said. "Some of us made it out. Not many, but a few. We scattered across the galaxy, tried to build new lives away from the war." Admiral Chen turned back to face him. "And you've been hiding here, working as a maintenance technician, for how long?" 3 months on this station. Before that, I moved around a lot. Different jobs, different identities. I tried to stay away from anything military, but..." Marcus gestured at the tactical displays around them. "Old habits die hard. Why hide?" Lieutenant Voss asked. "The Ghost Brigade were heroes. your tactics, your victories. You were legends even before Earth fell. Marcus's expression darkened. Because legends don't get to retire, Lieutenant. Because every government in the galaxy would want to use whatever was left of the Ghost Brigade for their own purposes. Because I've seen enough war for one lifetime. But you fought today, Zalaketh observed. When we needed help, you didn't hesitate to use those tactics to save us. That's different, Marcus replied. These people, you've been my friends and colleagues for 3 months. I couldn't just stand by and watch you die. Admiral Chen was studying a damage report on one of the displays. The way you coordinated this defense, the tactical innovations you implemented, that level of expertise doesn't just disappear. We could use someone with your skills. No, Marcus said firmly. I've told you who I am because you deserve the truth. But I'm not looking to go back to war. The war never ended, Admiral Chen replied quietly. It just changed shape. The hegemony has been building their strength for 15 years, developing new weapons, new tactics. What happened here today wasn't a random raid, it was a test. A test of what? Our defenses, our response times, our capabilities. The Admiral pulled up a star chart showing hegemony territory. Intelligence indicates they're planning something big, a major offensive that could destabilize the entire Outer Rim. Marcus studied the chart, his tactical mind automatically analyzing the strategic implications. The resource worlds, he said after a moment. They're going after the mining colonies and agricultural systems, cut off the coalition's supply lines, force a negotiated settlement. Exactly, Admiral Chen confirmed. And the coalition military isn't ready for that kind of coordinated assault. We've been fighting pirates and border skirmishes for 15 years. Most of our officers have never seen real warfare. Like the crew here, Marcus said, understanding starting to dawn. They're good people, brave soldiers, but they don't know how to fight a real war, which is why we need officers who do, Zalaketh interjected. Officers like you. Marcus shook his head. I'm not that person anymore. I've spent 15 years learning how to be someone else, how to live without violence. But you are still that person, Lieutenant Voss said. What you did today proved it. When people were in danger, when lives were on the line, you became Colonel Chen again. For one battle, Marcus corrected, against one enemy force. That's different from what you're asking. Admiral Chen walked over to stand directly in front of him. Marcus, I know what you've been through. I know what the war cost you, what it cost all of us. But the galaxy is heading toward another war whether we want it or not. The question is whether we're going to be ready for it. Find someone else, Marcus said. Train your officers, develop new tactics, but find someone else to lead them. There is no one else, Admiral Chen replied. The Ghost Brigade's tactical innovations died with Earth. You're the only one left who knows how they really worked, how to adapt them for current technology and threats. Marcus felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. These people were asking him to become someone he'd spent 15 years trying to forget, to take on responsibilities he'd deliberately abandoned. I need time to think, he said finally. Time is something we don't have much of, Admiral Chen warned. Hegemony fleet movements suggest their offensive will begin within weeks, maybe days. Then you'll have to make do without me for a little longer, Marcus replied. I've given you 15 years of peace. Give me 48 hours to decide if I'm willing to give up the rest of my life. Commander Zalaketh stepped forward. Colonel, or should I say Technician Chen, whatever you decide, you should know that everyone on this station owes you their lives. Your actions today saved us all. I was just doing my job, Marcus said quietly. No, she corrected, you were doing much more than that. You were being the person you've always been, regardless of what name you choose to use. As the group began to disperse, Admiral Chen remained behind. Marcus, he said when they were alone, I know what you're thinking. You believe that becoming Colonel Chen again means giving up everything you've built, everything you've become, doesn't it? Maybe. Or maybe it means finally integrating all the parts of yourself into something new. The Admiral paused. The Admiral. The Marcus Chen who served under me was a good officer, but he was also isolated, defined entirely by war and duty. The Marcus Chen I see today has learned how to connect with people. how to care about them as individuals rather than just soldiers under his command. Marcus considered this. And you think that makes me a better officer? I think it makes you a better person. And better people tend to make better leaders. Admiral Chen headed for the door, then paused. Whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of the man you've become, both the colonel and the technician. After the admiral left, Marcus stood alone in the command center, surrounded by the tactical displays and damage reports that told the story of their narrow victory. Through the viewports, he could see coalition ships moving in formation, securing the area and preparing for whatever came next. He thought about the soldiers he'd served with over the past 3 months, young people like Torres and Martinez, who looked at war as an opportunity for glory rather than the nightmare he knew it to be. If the hegemony was really planning a major offensive, those kids would be facing combat for which they weren't prepared against an enemy that had spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment. Marcus had told himself that his war was over, that he'd earned the right to peace after everything he'd sacrificed. But looking out at the stars, knowing what was coming, he wondered if anyone really got to choose when their war ended. The next 48 hours were going to be the longest of his life. Marcus spent the next 36 hours walking the corridors of Kepler's ship. 7. Observing the damage repair efforts and watching his fellow soldiers go about their duties. Word had spread quickly through the station about his true identity, and the reactions ranged from awe to suspicion to outright hero worship. Some soldiers avoided him entirely, unsure how to interact with someone whose tactical innovations were studied in military academies across the galaxy. Others, like Torres and Martinez, sought him out with endless questions about the war and the legendary Ghost Brigade. He found himself in the mess hall as his deadline approached, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the mixed crew of coalition personnel share their evening meal. The diversity still amazed him after 3 months. Humans sitting next to Ashaki, Kithara sharing jokes with Gorvani, species that had been enemies or strangers a generation ago now working together toward common goals. "Mind if I sit?" Torres asked, approaching with his dinner tray. Marcus gestured to the empty chair. "Free station." Torres sat down but didn't immediately start eating. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for what you did during the battle, but also for saving Jackson and Martinez during the training exercise." "I've been thinking about it, and I realize you've been looking out for all of us since you got here." "Just doing my job," Marcus replied. "See, that's what I don't understand," Torres said. "If you're really Colonel Chen, the Ghost Brigade commander, then why have you been pretending to be a maintenance tech? Why hide who you are?" Marcus considered the question. Because Colonel Chen was a soldier, that's all he knew how to be. Marcus Chen, the technician, learned how to be a person. But you're both, aren't you? You proved that during the battle. Before Marcus could respond, Commander Zalakith entered the mess hall and approached their table. "Colonel Chen," she said formally, "Admiral Chen requests your presence in the command center. Your 48 hours are up." Marcus finished his coffee and stood. "Thank you for the conversation, Torres. It helped clarify some things." The command center was busy with repair coordination and intelligence analysis. Admiral Chen was standing before the main tactical display studying fleet movement reports and reconnaissance data. When Marcus entered, he turned with an expression that revealed nothing of his expectations. "Have you reached a decision?" the Admiral asked. Marcus looked around the command center, noting the faces of the officers and crew who had become his colleagues over the past months. These were good people dedicated to protecting the civilian populations of the Outer Rim from exactly the kind of threat the hegemony represented. "I have," Marcus said. "But first, I need to know exactly what you're asking of me." Admiral Chen activated the main display, showing a comprehensive overview of the current strategic situation. Hegemony forces have been massing at 3 key staging areas along our border. Our intelligence indicates they're planning a coordinated offensive that will strike at our resource worlds and supply lines simultaneously. "Classic strategy," Marcus observed. "Cut off the supplies. Force a negotiated settlement before the enemy can mount an effective counteroffensive." "Exactly. But they're not just using standard tactics. Our reconnaissance shows they've developed new weapons, new ship designs, new coordinated assault protocols. They've learned from their defeat 15 years ago. Marcus studied the display more closely. So have we, presumably? To some extent, Admiral Chen admitted. But the coalition has been focused on peacekeeping and anti-piracy operations. We're not prepared for a full-scale war against a determined, well-equipped enemy. And you want me to change that. I want you to train a new generation of officers in the tactical innovations that made the Ghost Brigade effective. I want you to help us adapt those strategies for current technology and threats. And when the shooting starts, I want you to command a task force using those tactics. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications. If I agree to this, I won't be able to go back to being a maintenance technician. Once I'm Colonel Chen again, that's who I'll be for the rest of my life. Is that necessarily a bad thing, Commander Zalaketh asked. From what I've observed, you've found ways to be both the tactical genius and the person who cares about his teammates. Maybe, Marcus replied. But there's something else to consider. The Ghost Brigade wasn't just about tactics and strategy. We were effective because we were willing to make sacrifices that other units wouldn't. We accepted casualty rates that would have been unthinkable for conventional forces. Because you were fighting for the survival of your species, Admiral Chen said, and that willingness to sacrifice, that acceptance of necessary losses, it changes you. It makes you into someone who can calculate the value of lives in terms of tactical advantage. I'm not sure I want to become that person again. Lieutenant Voss, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. Sir, with respect, you don't have to become that person again. You can be the colonel who learned how to value individual lives, who understands that every casualty has a name and a story. Marcus looked at the young officer. You think that would make me more effective, or less? More? Voss replied without hesitation. Because soldiers fight harder for commanders they trust to value their lives. The question, Admiral Chen said, is whether you're willing to risk everything you've built over the past 15 years to find out if Lieutenant Voss is right. Marcus walked to the tactical display and began calling up specific data about hegemony force compositions and movement patterns. His mind automatically began analyzing the information, developing response strategies and countermeasures. If I do this, he said slowly, I'll need complete autonomy over training protocols and tactical development. No interference from coalition command, no second-guessing from politicians who think they understand warfare. Agreed, Admiral Chen said immediately. I'll also need a hand-picked staff of officers who are willing to learn new approaches even if they conflict with Academy doctrine. You can have anyone you want, and I'll need the authority to implement those tactics in actual combat operations, even if they seem unconventional or risky. Admiral Chen hesitated for just a moment. Within reason, yes. Marcus turned back to face them. Then I accept, but I want it understood that I'm not doing this to resurrect the Ghost Brigade or to become the legend that people think I am. I'm doing this because the people on this station have become my family, and I won't let them face this war unprepared. Commander Zalaketh stepped forward. What do you need from us? Time, first of all. How long before the hegemony offensive begins? Admiral Chen consulted his intelligence reports. Best estimate is 2 to 3 weeks. Not much time to retrain an entire fleet, but it'll have to do. Marcus began calling up personnel files on the display. I'll need these officers transferred to my command immediately. They've all shown tactical flexibility and innovative thinking. Quote, some of these are very junior officers, Lieutenant Voss observed. Junior officers haven't had time to become set in their ways, Marcus replied. They're more willing to try new approaches, more adaptable to changing situations. What about the crew here at Kepler? 7? Taurus asked, having entered the command center with several other soldiers. Marcus looked at the young man who had tried so hard to include him in their group activities. You're all going to become the core of the new tactical training program. You've seen these methods work firsthand, which means you can teach others how to implement them. Us? Teaching Academy graduates? Martinez sounded incredulous. You'd be surprised how much Academy graduates don't know about real combat, Marcus said. Your experience in actual battle, even just one engagement, gives you insights they lack.
Admiral Chen activated his communication system
I'll begin issuing the transfer orders immediately. How do you want to structure this new command? Marcus considered the question. Small, fast, flexible units that can coordinate with larger formations but also operate independently. Think of them as force multipliers, specialized teams that can take on missions too complex or dangerous for conventional forces, like the Ghost Brigade used to do, Zalaketh observed. Similar concept, but adapted for coalition doctrine and current technology, Marcus paused, and with a much stronger emphasis on bringing everyone home alive. Over the next several hours, they worked out the details of the new command structure and training program. Marcus would be promoted to Brigadier General and given command of a new Special Operations Division, with units stationed throughout the Outer Rim. The soldiers from Kepler, 7 would form the core training cadre, teaching the new tactics to volunteers from across the Coalition fleet. As the planning session wound down, Marcus found himself alone with Admiral Chen in the command center. The older man was studying the tactical displays with the expression of someone who had seen too many wars and hoped this one might be the last. "Any regrets?" the Admiral asked. Marcus thought about his quiet quarters, his routine maintenance duties, the peaceful anonymity he was giving up. "Ask me again in 6 months," he said, "when we know whether this was wisdom or folly." "Fair enough." Admiral Chen turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Not just for the Coalition, but for yourself. Why? Because the Marcus Chen I knew 15 years ago was a brilliant tactician but a lonely man. The Marcus Chen I see today has learned how to be part of something larger than himself. That's going to make him a better leader and a better person." After the Admiral left, Marcus stood alone in the command center, looking out at the stars that had been his home for the past 15 years. Somewhere out there, the hegemony was preparing for war. And now, for the first time since the fall of Earth, humanity would be ready for them. He thought about the soldiers who would serve under his command, young people like Torres and Martinez who deserved better than to learn about war through trial and error. He thought about the civilians in the Outer Rim colonies who were counting on the Coalition to protect them even if they didn't know it. And he thought about the man he used to be, and the man he had become, and the possibility that maybe he could be both. The war was coming, but this time humanity wouldn't face it alone. This time they would be ready. Marcus Chen, former maintenance technician and newly appointed Brigadier General, began planning for a battle he had spent 15 years hoping he would never have to fight. But as he worked, he found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, hope that this war might end differently than the last one. Outside the command center windows, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns indifferent to the struggles of the species that moved between them. But for the first time in 15 years, Marcus Chen was ready to fight for the future those stars might hold.